Hey everyone, I'm Noctis Corvus, call me Noctis. Today I'm bringing you part 2 of the Elements set, where I'm drawing the basic 4 elements as people. This video includes earth and air, since the first one featured fire and water. The first part will be linked below, though it isn't mandatory for understanding this video. It's more going to be there in case you want to see those designs and see kind of what I talked about in that video, but it will be linked below with everything else. Also, this week I'm going to mention here that I have released a shop update over on my Etsy store. Another thing that is being linked in the description. Just in case that is something that people have been interested in, as I've been teasing it quite a bit here. But stick around towards the end for more details on that, since without further ado I will be getting on into the actual topic of this week's video. That of course brings us into discussing air first, as she is the first one we're doing today. Well, she was the first one I did out of the two, since she was the one who sort of helped me generate ideas for them both. And there were a few phases to her development. But as is tradition for these videos, we shall begin at the beginning. So, the early ideas. I sort of looked at the same ideas as I did with the other two, where I considered the positive and the negative sides of the element. I mean, air is associated with the breeze. They're playful and often seen as figures always changing their mind or motives, as the wind is something always changing direction. It's also more of an energetic element, due to the varying strengths of wind, the idea that the air is always something to be moving somewhere. It never will simply just stand still. Now, on the flip side of all of that, there is also the idea of going with the flow, or going where the wind takes you, as this sort of free spirit motto. It sort of takes the idea that people shouldn't fight too hard against what will happen, and instead loosen up and see whatever happens. So even in that sense, the wind is an element of motion and change. It's something that will often just go with things or move around them, rather than insisting on going through something or fighting against something. That's often what's meant by go with the flow and such. Don't resist what's going to happen and instead just go with it, find a way around it and adapt to it. Now, all of this then led to the consideration of the term airhead, or someone who has their head up in the clouds, which is often used as an insult, in all honesty. It tends to imply that someone is distracted or dumb, or someone who spends most of their time daydreaming. It's normally meant to imply that their mind is full of air rather than anything else. And they're terms that I haven't sort of heard in a while, but I did remember them when beginning to generate ideas for this stage. Though, to be fair, I did move away from them fairly quickly, since it wasn't something I could spin into too many positive connotations. And I didn't really want to be building a character based off of negativity, especially since I haven't done that with any of the other elements. So it didn't feel right to do it with air in this sense. But it did lead me towards the negative side of air and the element of wind. See, just like all of the other elements, it has two sides. Wind is also the element for storms and tornadoes. Similar to water in that sense. Though with the wind, there are also simply strong winds. When those come in, it can pull up trees, cause accidents on the road, and generally just disturb overall routine and everyday life. I mean, I do recall a day during college, where the strong winds meant that many people couldn't make it in due to roads and potential accidents. Yet we more commonly think of air as a playful element, and one needed for everyday life. I mean, we do need it to breathe. In the end, a lot of early ideas did address different aspects of this. I mean, I considered including more of the negative element to it, and ultimately changed my mind during the sketching phases, since I hadn't put much emphasis on it with the others as well. And I didn't want one element to be negative in comparison to all of the others. I also came to prefer the more active side of the element and the playful appearance that I could take with it. And this is really where a lot of the early ideas lay. At first, she would have been some sort of athletic figure. Maybe someone with references to multiple sports or activities tied into their character. All I knew is that they would have been active. A lot of earlier drawings include them in some sort of sporting kit, and pose as if they're playing a range of them. I had one where they were playing football, another one where they were playing tennis, and all sorts of different sports that I looked at. It then changed slightly to look more at other types of sports, like dance or gymnastics too. Things that really captured how the wind in the air tends to be depicted as spinning or dancing in a sense normally. Though it was to a point where I didn't see air. I didn't quite understand the route I was taking with it since it wasn't the element anymore, just a player of various games. So this meant I came to change direction. I sort of took a step away for a while and worked a little on Earth, just to sort of reassess those inspirations at this stage. And, well, air is an element always on the move. I could keep the active element in this sense, and that is really where the idea of roller skates came to be included in their design. The pose did then come from this, and different references of roller skating, but only to a degree. I didn't strictly follow a single design or reference for that bit, since there were a few other choices I wanted to make with it. Such as the fact that I wanted them to wave. I wanted them to be approachable and friendly, as part of the spirit to the wind, rather than someone focused on a game or sport. Almost as if they're happy to move and play for fun, and not strictly competition, as I thought that better fit the element. It's something all over and around everyone, so it sort of made more sense when I thought about it in that respect. I then had to overcome the issue of it looking like air and not just a random person, which I felt I came to do in a way that also matches the set fairly well. She doesn't look too out of place and she belongs in the set, yet she is also unique in her own sense. All elements have tiny details that tie the person to their element. Fire could be a normal person, except that her eyes hold the flame. Water could also be any person, unless it was for her hair. All of these are little touches I chose to make since it made more sense to me to do it in this manner. For air, it came to be her clouds. Now I do think I add them nearer to the end, or I at least shade them at the end. I've kind of forgotten at this point, though I do know that I use this motif all over the character. And that leads us into the little details of the character. But I want to begin touching fully on the fun details. We can save the challenges for later on in this figure since there were only a couple, and I want to do the fun part first. And the first up on this list? The colour palette. And yes, okay, it isn't exactly a small detail, it's more of its own section here normally. But it is something I feel that I could address here at this stage. I mean, air is one of those elements that the colour often changes. Everybody else in the group has a set colour that you think about when you think of the element. Fire is red, water is blue, but air is one of those that there isn't a set colour for it. I've seen people make it purple to complement the other elements. I've then seen Airbender, where the air nomads are yellow and orange. From there I've also seen grey quite commonly as another contender for the element's colour. And in the odd and rare case, I could also swear once I saw something where water was purple, a nod to the depths of the ocean, and air was the blue element, as a nod to the sky. So I really had many options with it. Again, fire is red, earth is green or brown. Spoiler for that one, I suppose. And water is more often than not blue. But for air, it's something that itself shifts and changes. Rather fitting that it would be air of all elements to do that and not to have a strict colour. It kind of relies on the question of what is air and what colour is air. Because again, to us, it's something transparent, so I can kind of see where each of the colours come from. Now, what did I do for this instance? Well, you can already see. I decided to almost combine them all to a degree. The main tone I assigned to it was grey, since it was close to colourless. Maybe someday I would redo this and choose transparent as its colour, or, well, as its palette. But to do that I would first have to be able to figure out how it would work. But for now I chose grey. But not just grey. I also chose the other colours as a subtle accent to it. So there is grey as the main tone, but I tie in blue to refer back to the sky. I tie in purple as a nod to seeing it elsewhere and to complement the blue, but also as a nod to the night sky. Yet I then include another colour you've likely already noticed. Pink. I don't know if anyone has heard the saying, red sky at night, shepherd's delight, red sky in the morning, shepherd's warning. Yet it's a saying that I've heard for most of my life, and it was sort of what I had been working off. See, sunset and sunrise often includes hues of pink alongside the orange and red spoken of in the saying. It's something that is rather pretty to see, all things considered. So I wanted to draw off of that in a sense. I didn't want to include the red, it being a little far from my ideal for this piece, in a sense, since it was a little too strong when testing it off camera. Yet the pink and blue combination is something that I often love how it looks and how it works. I rarely use it as a combination, but it does work so well together, which is also why I included it in this sort of palette. It's a subtle nod to the saying of red skies, and it also ties in quite well with the currently present colours. This then leads us to the next detail of the character though, just all of the little clouds that I had around her. See, I had a few ideas for how to include the motif. You've likely seen more than a few, but each element sort of has a shape that I assigned to it to carry the ideas of the figure. For example, water has her pearls. Air has this cloud and fluffy motif. Like, on their socks, they have pom-poms on them, and their shorts have these pendants as the hem, which includes the cloud directly. I then have their top have a print of a cloud on it. Just sidetracking a moment here, they also have a sort of spiky pattern associated with them, only because that's what I associate with the sun whenever it's stylised, and it's how I used to draw the sun as a kid. So that is kind of why I include that element on the edges of the top, and elements like the shorts pockets. But getting back on track, the clouds are also their element sign. I had a lot in the final stages around her hair and the overall character. Originally, I was going to make it their hair. Like, I considered making their hair closer to resemble a cloud in some sense. That I wasn't sure how I was going to do it or include, but I would have somehow. There are a few sketches where I play around with various ideas. Though I decided in the sketching phase to avoid it. I kind of prefer the space buns and the clouds around it as an accent almost. I mean, it also worked better in a point of contrast, both in the set and the figure. Most of the other characters have elements going on with or near the hair. I mean, Fire's is a gradient, which may be dyed if it were real, but Water's is their element. So I kind of wanted Air to have an accent near their hair, but not really have it to be their hair, if that makes any sense. I kind of imagine it where the clouds would float around the head, but not really connect to the hair in any sense. And this did work well too. I mean, I really like how the details came out and the motif worked across the figure. It's also how the bracelets came to be. I mean, they are floating and hovering around the wrist with a pom-pom or cloud included in it, which looks kind of cool around the jacket and such too. I mean, I know I give a lot of my figures bracelets, but this one is one I enjoyed since it was something a little different that I actually could do. It didn't really give me any issues though, and I almost did forget to include them. But that does lead us into the final easy detail. This being 2 bits of fabric I included off the shorts, as a sort of background detail behind her. Those were something I found fun and thought would be interesting to include as their movement could show the motion of the wind and breeze. They'd be something to spin, and most likely tangle, but also dance in the motions that she would make, whilst being a nod to how the wind interacts with things like flags and such. But that is really there is all to say on that detail itself. It was only a small little addition. Now with the time left on this figure, it leads me more onto the challenging details I included with her. Of everything, these were the skates and the jacket. So really only 2 things I haven't spoken about with her yet. And let's begin with the skates. They're slightly less of a headache, all things considered, at this point. See, I sketched them originally separate from the figure, as a little side doodle in the sketchbook. Yet I then decided they would fit better than boots or trainers or whatever else I had considered. Then I actually had to include them and shade them. Really, this was more of an issue with myself. I just entirely forgot how to draw wheels when it came to shading stuff. But I also made the choice in drawing to remove the front stoppers off the skates, which would be a safety hazard, but also worked in the sense that, number one, it's a drawing, and number two, the winds never stop, as I have touched on. So that's really my justification for not including the stoppers. Me forgetting how to draw wheels was just me forgetting how to draw wheels. But the shading was something that I really just forgot what I was doing during that part. And for the eagle-eyed viewers who have either noticed or notice what I miss, yes, I only saw it yesterday when getting the footage of prints I've made for them. For those confused, I missed shading the sole of the skates, as they remained a plain pink. I did this image a few weeks ago between drawing and the scripts, as recent videos mentioned, but I only recently saw this fact last night, so I had to fix it and reprint it, but it is better now that I caught it. It is also better that I caught it now before I had actually gone further with the footage and pictures of the prints. Now, other than the stoppers and the soles, the skates didn't give me much more of a headache. Of course, that includes me choosing to forget the wheels. But the final detail of Air was the jacket. I argued with shading it a fair amount, since it was meant to look as if it was falling off one's shoulder, and yet still moving with the person. It wasn't perfect in any sense, but it got to a part where I was happy enough with it, where it suited the piece and the character. But I mainly struggled with getting the sense of the fabric bunching and overlapping with each other, where it would gather as if it had been falling. Especially since I felt the jacket would be a thicker material that would keep her warm. And in the end, it is something I feel like I just kind of worked out through trial and error. And I did have a while where I felt like removing it. It wouldn't have made much of a difference, and I could have explored other ideas I had with it. But that just didn't feel right. The big jacket has sections that look like a cloud in a sense, and it felt like a shortcut or an easy way out to just remove it. And yes, if it generally wouldn't work and would have been better without it, I would have changed it. But it does work like this, and I prefer it this way. Though that's just how it tends to go with the challenging details. They're the ones that need a little bit of extra work here and there, but they are the details that I still want to include, and the drawing is better because I include them. Now, in saying all of that, it has brought us slightly past the end of Air, and into the next element. So it's rather about time that I move on too. Earth. The element that makes up the ground we walk on, plants, and the element with a hint of confusion to it as to what it exactly entails. I mean, do we count Earth as plants and the natural aspect of it? Or do we separate it to just rocks and stone? Or is it a mixture of them both? In the end, I kind of went with the mixture option, but the original debates of this element had ideas that focused on all definitions, and featured a lot of confusing debates with family members whenever they asked me about my recent ideas. And a little off topic here just for a moment. Do tell me if you would want to see light and dark in this set, or just in general. The two fantasy elements commonly added. As I have considered including them at moments, and I will most likely end up doing them as their own separate thing too. Maybe just without calling them elements or whatever. But let me know if it is something of interest at some point. But for now, the final of the four, Earth. Which takes us back to the start of the list, where we will begin again with the two sides of the element and how this came to influence the figure and ideas later down the line. As I have already touched on, I had to first work out which context of Earth I was working with, as an element, and not just embodying the planet itself. In the end, I went with rocks and plants as a healthy middle to generate ideas from. Besides, working with one of the two didn't feel quite right either. But, in this sense, it is a foundation we know, and something responsible for life in a multiple sense of the word. And with this, there are many ideas of the element and the way that it's presented. And I mean, there are different aspects of Earth when you look at it as a planet scale. There's icy tundras, ocean depths, and tropical heats. Each of these are technically part of the element, and part of what people think of whenever we mention Earth. I mean, it doesn't help that the element is named after the entire planet, since the planet is a foundation for all of life we know of, which I've touched on. And yes, I am including the ocean life here, since that is also a sort of shared space with water and earth. All elements are needed in some capacity and they do tend to overlap, so drawing a hard definition and a firm line between them never seems to work out too well. Yet, the earth as an element is something that nurtures and holds all life. We can't escape it or stand outside of the environment, as the earth has an impact on anyone at some point. It's why most would depict it as a mother figure. I mean, there's a whole narrative and history to the idea of Mother Earth as a concept, and it stems from the idea of Earth as someone who cares for all on the planet, animals and plants alike. It nurtures and allows life, aiding it at points and such, and it's an idea that I've seen a lot. This is also part of the element's reverse. See, a mother isn't just kind. Ideally they would be most of the time, yet a mother is to guide and raise, which includes moment of discipline or educating. A Mother Nature would be the same, since nature can be cruel at times, and it does often turn on itself with things like the food chain. It's why the predator would hunt the prey and why things aren't always easy. Though, just to move away from that metaphor at this point, the Earth can give and take, both as a planet and element. We can grow food from it and build out of materials found in it. Yet there is then the cruel side: earthquakes, sinkholes, and volcanoes. There are a lot of natural disasters that are part of the Earth in general, that then have an impact on people and communities. It is an element that has interested me at how the two sides are the most evident of the entire element set. People discuss both in equal amounts, and the depictions often include both sides, unlike what people tend to see with other elements. After all, the element is also a firm one, whilst it is this nurturing idea. Rocks are something that can be hard to break, and the Earth is part of that too. You can't really move a mountain without a lot of time and slow motions. Most of the change in the Earth takes lifetimes, and is something people won't see happen too quickly. The plants may change and animals may shift, but not things like mountains and rock. All of this is to kind of circle and say that there is a lot to Earth and their two sides. A lot of ideas that I had to work with. And they were two sides that I wanted to play with. My first idea built off this idea of Earth as everything with the plants and such. A figure in a dress made of moss and flowers, tied with vines and accented with stones. Yet that is an idea I've done before, long before this and long before I was ever on social media. And I have seen it in more places. So I then considered a being with two sides, kind and firm, that could kind of have the duality of nature, since it is hard to almost separate Earth the element and Earth the planet. Though nothing quite seemed to fit. And, despite the interest, I couldn't quite capture what I wanted to for the idea of Earth. I had a lot of sketches too that explored all different ideas. Some looked too much like a plant personified. Some looked more like an animal in human form. They were all off in slight ways. So I began to take a different route, as they began to stray too far from the other elements in the set. And all of them are meant to look human first. They are people with elemental details that make them that element. Earth began to shift too far from humans in these early ideas. And this is always an idea I can revisit later, or do in a different way should I feel like it. But, this time, I wanted to take a safer route and keep them all very human. Especially since I had done 3 in the set at this point. So I began to take a different route. The first idea was a gardener of sorts, and then grew to include someone more outdoorsy in a sense. I developed separate ideas of the character before compiling them into one single thing. I mean, I developed the ideas for the boots, and then the top, and then the idea to keep a pose fairly simple, and one that doesn't give too much away. A person simply standing. This is all to say that the development was a bit of a messy process. I didn't have a straight idea for them until I had the final sketch, which is different than how I normally do it. And I will touch on details soon, explain how I feel that they tie them all into the element and the set, yet I do want to first address the pose. I had a few thoughts that never quite felt right with it, so it's why it's the first thing up on the list. As I've already mentioned, Earth as an element is a lot of things. So, for the character, I had to choose one route to take. Originally, they were sitting and almost picking plants or crouching near some. These obscured most of the design and stood out too much in the group, especially since everybody else was standing. So, therefore, I went with them standing. And I just went with a simple standing pose that doesn't have them doing much or showing off too much. Something simple that doesn't draw attention like the others do. They are just simply holding gathered flowers and standing. And it worked in this context too. They're all sort of simple poses when you look at them, and Earth is more direct than the others. It's something that gives away very little. I was sort of working with the idea of their personality being the most firm in the group, one who may not be so open to the theatrics of the other elements. And yes, I am meant to look and be kind too. This bit is a very short section to touch on. But that just brings us even quicker into the details of the character, and Earth has a fair few to touch on. First up, the hair. I went very simple with it, just something to sort of add to the character and almost back them. The longer length being chosen as a sort of nod to plants and things growing from the earth and how it allows it. Most of the details are then at the top part of the hair, but I did make a choice on the ends too for a more stylised appearance. See, I kind of made the ends resemble a leaf shape, even though I don't shade them as leaves. It was more something I chose to do with a nod to the plants as part of the element, without making her hair the actual element, seeing as I did that with water, and Earth already had a lot tied into the design in other spaces. I then chose green for the hair as it was a nod to the palette, and it fit it quite well. Now, I haven't quite touched on the colour palette yet, only because it is quite obvious why I chose brown and green. Most of the details I added to the hair are in the top half with the added hairpiece, a detail I chose to be unique to Earth. See, I did still want to include flowers and plants in multiple instances, and who can say no to a good flower crown? This is then added to and expanded upon by the leaves that are meant to match her hair in a sense. It is a space I ultimately left up to the viewer. Is the leaf part of the hairpiece, or is it part of the fringe? I mean, the ends take the leaf's shape, and yet the hair is shaded as hair. So the fringe could be behind the leaves, or it could be the leaves. It was something I purposely didn't want to really answer either way, since it was a fun detail and something a little more unique to the character. It then leads me into opposite details though. The boots. From head to toe in a sense. See, the boots were something I knew I would want to include for this character, as they're something more equipped for outside matters, and stuff like doing more outdoorsy activities. And they were originally going to be plain brown boots or black boots. It was just going to be your typical boot to let other details pop and draw attention. Yet I then felt the further I went that it wouldn't be quite right to leave them plain. That and the fact that the brown boots were too close to the background. They were too similar and it was merging visually into the background behind it, without there being many fixes to that wasn't dramatic shading, making the boots too light or much darker or unusual lighting on them to almost outline it all. So I took another fix to them. I made them a lighter green and added the rock pattern to them, since I hadn't been able to include the imagery of stones and rock into the character too much at this point. This was a motif I did want to include in the character quite a lot as well. I mean, Earth as an element is connected to the stone in equal amounts as plants, but the idea of the stone gives this idea of an unmoving force that is the ground, and so it only felt right to have little nods to this aspect alongside everything else pointing towards the plants and other natural details that I had already included. Though, let's keep moving and discuss the next section. And we can work our way up as I want to explain the idea behind the belt. See, it was actually one of my first ideas for this entire piece, and the first thing I had decided on when looking at what I could do for her. It's meant to look as if the leaves are connected together in a sense. The section at the side trailing off is almost like a loose section that has been left to flow and hang in a sense, with the various accents then hanging from the main belt, this then tying into the stones. It was something smaller in the earlier stages, a little tie-in of one aspect that I could then link into other areas. Mainly this tie to the headpiece where I have the same threads hanging between aspects of it. All of the characters have a detail made up of these little hanging threads, mainly since they're so easy to include and fun to turn into smaller details that add interest to the piece. And yes, it's easy, but it also looks good, which is why I keep returning to it. But these threads then inspired me to hang rocks off of them, which then inspired me to include the rock bracelet, since it made me consider how I could potentially come to tie everything together. It also, in a sense, inspired the boot details the further I pushed with it. But all of these tiny nods came together to make it a little more coherent, and to balance the plant aspect that had already been included. And after all of this, I had decided on the top last, if that makes sense. I had that many different ideas for the top that I had been struggling to settle on a single one, so ended up almost working around it when sketching. That was until I had the idea for a flower-like section in the neckline, which then cemented the rest of the idea as is seen. Plus, the rounded sleeves almost resemble a flower, an idea which had been more obvious in another version where I had made them like a daisy, and yet it was a subtle nod here that I preferred, since it cemented them as earth with it being a small detail rather than a personification of the flower. Naturally though, I had struggled with the top a little more since I had details that I wanted to add and include, but I also wanted to include the flower aspect they'd been holding, and the flowers that they're holding did mean that the details of the top would be covered, so all of the detailed ideas ended up having to be scrapped as it was too visually confusing with the flowers in front. And the flowers in front had been interesting too. If you've seen one of my Drawing Dream and Nightmares videos, I had this woman in a lake with flowers around her. And for this instance, I took the process developed there so that they were similar when drawing those in her hand. It worked well as a point of support, but it also meant I didn't have to worry too much for the stems in a sense. But it also works well as a subtle feature. The majority are in her hand or at least touching another, so they may look as if they've been propped up by those below or behind. It makes sense there that she is holding them. Yet there are a few below her hand as if they're falling out, because she has too many. And then one or two above her hand that are floating in a sense. It's something people can give meaning to if they wish, yet it is also subtle enough that they can miss it if people prefer. It was a detail I considered changing or keeping a lot too, though in the end, if I chose one of the other ideas, then the character of the piece would be entirely different. By the way I'm talking and writing, I may as well start doing a series of alternate ideas, where I just take the other routes I considered. Tell me if you'd be interested in that though, but it may also just be done in a way that I give it enough time and revisit the set down the line, when I want to do it again. Anyway, I feel like I am starting to ramble here, and I suppose I know why. But that brings us to the final talking point of today's video, and it does move away from the characters. It is an announcement that I've been waiting to make, and that is my shop update. All of the new stickers I've been waiting to add are up over on my Etsy and available this week, and going forward. It's exciting since I've waited a while to see these stickers in person, and I'm so happy with how they all came out. I mean, they came when I was out with a friend, so I was excited myself to get to see them for the first time. And to pick a favourite would be a difficult task, in all honesty. And other news. The Elements series are the first time that I'm trialling a new idea. See, I've sold prints over there for a while, so they aren't a first in that regard. But this time I decided to do something slightly different for the launch of these prints. First, they are borderless A5 prints, something I've been working out how to make for a while with the printer settings, but feel that it looks so nice now that I've worked it out. However, for the first 50 of each print, I will be including a sticker freebie of that element too. I'll be showing bits of them here on screen, some of the pictures of the prints and the stickers. I'll also be showing you all of the other designs here too. It will remain as the first 50 for now, but if it's something people seem to enjoy, I will likely bring this back in the future for later sets that I have in mind as well. But overall, I'm really happy to be able to announce this as something I've been working on in the background for a while too. It's also been the main reason I had to wait so long to upload part 2 of this set. As for the other designs, I hope people enjoy them too, as some I do plan to expand on in the future. But that is the final thing I have to say on this today. So thank you so much for watching today, and I hope you join me next week for whatever I end up doing there. I hope you at least check out the update at the store, but otherwise, have a wonderful day, and goodbye.